I wanted to basically talk to share to dispel a few ideas. Now I don't know that um these are not necessarily myths that this group of people subscribes to, but these are myths that the media reform and justice movement has been operating on for a very long time. And I think it's important for us to have a conversation. Um, we understand right now that we're in a fight for the future. Yeah, we get that clearly. Um, we understand that there are competing visions for what the future should be, who should live, who should die, whose nation it is, who should get to be here, all of that. We know that already. But one thing that this sector has tended to focus on, is the democratizing potential of the internet, the democratizing potential of digital technologies. But I think the sector sometimes fails to remember that that the internet and these technologies also have anti-democratic roots as well, right? And those anti-democratic roots deserve our attention because they help explain the current moment. Uh, the last 50 years of neoliberalism, they have proven to be a great failed experiment, right? One that has laid the ground for the kind of feudal techno-fascism that we see emerging today. We can talk more about what that means later, but first I want to just kind of initiate this conversation by articulating that I understand there to be two competing visions of democracy, two competing versions of democracy that have emerged over the last century, and that the internet, as we understand it, was built by both of these tendencies. And it's important for us to understand that the internet, as well as our telecom system, as well as our media system, our systems of communication emerge from both of these tendencies. One version, uh, was forged. One version of one way that we understand the internet, right, in American digital architecture, was forged by the late by the progressive politics of the New Deal, right, following the Great Depression and in the um, late 1920s and early 1930s. The anti-colonial resistance movements across the globe, right, in the 30s and early 40s, the rise of the labor unions in the 40s, the U.S. civil rights and power movements of the 1950s and 60s, right? The feminist and anti-war movements of the 1970s, the anti-globalization movements of the 1980s. First of all, we just don't tend to position ourselves inside of that history, you know? And I think it's important for us to understand in that version, that version of the internet promised to be this democratizing force, right? And the way they talked about it, right, was like almost as a tool to tame the worst tendencies of capitalism, you know, meaning that they thought the internet could be this democratizing force inside of existing capitalism, right? That's a version of democracy that has been asserted by the State Department, through World War One and World War II, and for centuries, right? This version of democracy that is a set of laws, a constitution, a way of doing governance that tames capitalism, that can coexist with capitalism. That version, though, of the internet, and that that the internet could be a democratizing force inside of a uh, racial capitalism, you know, was rooted in this faulty belief, though, that labor unions and some limited version of social liberalism could save capitalism from itself, but still maintain it as the economic base of democracy. See, the thing is, a lot of times we don't have a class analysis, right? When it comes to understanding the role of digital architecture, of infrastructure, of technology in America, we we uh, we sometimes don't look at it we don't put the class analysis on it so that we can better understand its role, its function in the society. So this other version, right, of the internet and of this digital architecture, which was forged by the threads of fascism, right? Baked in, by the genocide of Native Americans, the transatlantic slave trade, a lingering but then fostered Eurofascism following World War II, also an ultra patriarchy, right? That kind of celebrated this perceived link between capitalism, entrepreneurship, and the nuclear family in this profound rejection of the welfare state and in reaction to the decline of American industrialism. Now, I thought about what to share with y'all. I thought I could rail on about Trump, and I'm sure I will, but I thought it was important for us to actually root in some history and deepen our analysis, because when I started in this sector, there were very few Black faces, almost none. There were Black people in community media. There were Black people in the places where Black communities was at, right? But in terms of places where we were fighting around policy, in terms of being in DC, in terms of any of that, there was no Black people. There certainly were almost no queer people, and certainly no genderqueer people, no butchers, no studs, no trans people. So at the time, I was a singular character, yes, and beyond that, I'm an explicit leftist. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a progressive. I stand as a leftist, and I'm a movement head. I'm not even an organizational head. I started Media Justice because that was what was needed, not because I believe in organizations as a tool to move an agenda, but not for anything more than that, which is why when I left, I passed it to someone who I knew could move that agenda forward. I say all this to say that you are now, this is your time now, and I want to be sure that you have the tools, the analysis, the understanding, and hopefully the resources that you need to claim this moment as your own. That's its own thing. Okay. But anyway, add to the history, right? The NAFTA and other globalization efforts of the late 1900s, then coupled with this right-wing attack, right, on what was framed then as political correctness and the beginning of explicit right-wing culture wars, with the internet as the platform for all of this contest. Yeah, the early platform for all of this contest. Now, this version of democracy is straight up autocratic, it's chauvinist, it's anti-feminist, it sees government and public infrastructure as subservient to capital. And what's important is when we say we're pro-democracy, we have to understand that it's both these versions of democracy that are on the table here. And neither of these versions of democracy serve our community. It's very important. The media reform and justice movements have been positioned as part of the pro-democracy movements, in the United States and around the world. And I want to suggest to you first and foremost that in order that therefore we have to challenge and really understand and articulate what version of democracy are you for? What are you talking about? If you are if this is about preserving democracy, what democracy? For whom? And I think this moves us, into a relationship with other parts of the movement that we may or may not be in at this time. So that's the first thing. I think it's important to note that both of these trends built the internet, and built the tech industry that we're navigating today. The understanding this, right, can help us to be, okay, come on. Can help us to be clear that the current capture of the government, right, by billionaire tech and media moguls has historic roots. It's not politically anomalous. It is not an anomaly. You feel me? It should help us be clear about the kind of sides that have emerged, right? One that appeared socially liberal, but still was capitalist, and the other that appears socially conservative, But this idea that they are on two separate sides, that is what is being challenged for us right now. We see the lack of the difference without a distinction without a difference, sometimes between the Republicans and the Democrats. And we see tech moguls that appeared socially liberal before now moving wholeheartedly into a socially conservative position, indicating that they weren't socially liberal before. What they were was profit motivated, and that being socially liberal then was good for profits. They saw and they see social movements as a market. And so long as social movements for liberation and justice are a good market, a profitable, a lucrative market, then they for it. When it's not lucrative, they against it. And it's important for us to understand that. I am of the third way. I am of the actual left. I'm a lot of my colleagues in the media reform movement, they lean left, they progressive, they liberal. And I think that that's different. And I think that results in a different politic. It results in different strategies. It results in a different analysis. I assert democratic socialism as the political and economic base of the future that I'm looking for. And I ask you, what is the future that you want? What is can you articulate it with crystal clarity? Do you understand the motive forces, the balance of forces? Can you articulate what they call the conjuncture, the conditions at this moment? This is important for us. We are, and I say this in all honesty and earnestness, we have to be smarter than them. We have to know more than they do about our conditions. They always articulate what they believe our conditions to be, and then try to convince us into that, and pull us into a strategy that they believe is winnable under the conditions. That's not the measure for us, and so we have to be thoughtful and strategic. I do believe in winning. I don't believe in being on some pie in the sky shit that can't work, but also that it has to be based in a different understanding than what I believe the progressive and the liberal strategy is different. It has to be a different strategy for us. We have to be under the understanding that, I'm not anti-reform. I believe in reforms, but it's the quality of the reform that matters. Yeah. The purpose of it, who will it serve, so on and so forth. If it's a reform that is based on the assessment that there's some soft version of capitalism, that if we just make a tweak, we can make it better. I don't believe that. I believe capitalism fosters a brutal and hierarchical inequality. There's no soft version. And the tech and the tech industry and the tech empire that has been forged by neoliberal capitalism inevitably gave rise to techno-fascism. That was inevitable. There was no other direction possible. And that's what has happened. So that's the first thing. And another piece of that is, what the media reform movement has largely done is assert this idea that technology is neutral, that it can be neutral, depends on, who's in power. But the fact is, since it was built by a history of power dynamics, a very specific history of power dynamics, we don't need to be fantasizing about what technology might be if it wasn't built that way, but because it was, And so, under these conditions, infrastructure serves power, period. So the only analysis that matters to us is who is in power, what is the power analysis, and how do we build our power. It doesn't, anything else about some idea about what tech could be or might be or whatever is just irrelevant to me. I'm gonna move from that. That's just a set of assumptions that I wanted to undergird this conversation with. The next thing that I wanted to share with you is this idea, like, so all of this comes to all of this thinking lands me here. Elon Musk, right? Peter Thiel, Mark Zuckerberg, all of these white men, yes, they're not an anomaly. And not just white men, let's be clear. There are Indian men, there are Asian men. They're all men, though, I'll tell you that. And they're all men that have that identify in some way with whiteness and white supremacy. They are not an anomaly, though. It's important because a lot of our colleagues out here are like, damn, I can't believe this is wild. I can't believe this is happening. And it's like, why not? You know, you laid the ground for that. You know what I mean? Why you can't believe it's happening? They absorbed the lessons of the last several decades. They emerged from this history. And we see them cozying up to Trump now, not just because they hope for deregulation, which they do, but also because they agree with his ideology and they always have. You know, so that when we talked, 10 years ago, we talked about Facebook, we talked about Twitter, as it related to the Arab Spring and as this democratizing force, not only in the United States, but across the globe and playing this pro-democracy role in the Middle East. We see today that these companies play a fascist role in the Middle East, in exactly the opposite. And so what we understand is that the driver has always been and will always be profit. The ideology is irrelevant. The ideology is tied to the economic system. And so one that is not separated from the other. Earlier this month, and I want to say also, this isn't just about capital, and it's just not just about race. It is about both of those things, but it's also about gender. And we need to really, this is not an area that this sector has largely engaged in, but it's important. This is a gendered anti-feminist trend that is underway right now. Earlier this month, Zuckerberg announced that Meta was ending its DEI programs. Y'all heard that, and changing its platform policies to allow more discriminatory and harassing posts. Now, Zuckerberg appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast. Now, that's a right wing podcast, right? And he made his motivations clear. He said he claimed that corporate culture had moved away from, quote, masculine energy and needed to reinstate it after getting, quote, neutered. Elon Musk has reshaped Twitter into X, a platform that in large part operates as a response to the claims of what he says is a woke mind virus. That's what he calls it, the newest iteration of the political correctness thing. And we got the Silicon Valley venture capitalist. I don't know if you heard of him, Mark Anderson. Andreessen, I don't know how you say his last name, but he's one of the richest people in Silicon Valley. And he's increasingly drawn inspiration from, and not only him, but a bunch of folks from these Italian futurists, right, which is a movement of fascist artists in the early 20th century who glorified technology as a means to, quote, demolish feminism. This is an anti-feminist, masculinist, misogynist approach or strategy or trend. It's very important, right? This is so big tech, once framed as as this democratizing force, now needs to be understood as an autocratic, chauvinist, and anti-democratic force. This is a very big shift in understanding this technology from even 15 years ago. And it's important. It decreases public engagement, right? It does, it leaves democratic institutions at the mercy of vested interests, and that undermines their ability to function. The last set of things that I'll say is this: the same thing is true about automation, right? Trump has prioritized building private AI infrastructure in the U.S. to the tune of over $500 billion in investments. Our safety net is crumbling. The man has promised over $500 billion to build private AI infrastructure. He's already setting it up to name China as this main AI competitor. and he's threatening to make these investments and make this, push forward this innovation through emergency declarations. So, he says that he wants to develop AI that's free from, quote, ideological bias. Now, we already know what that means. That means he wants to develop some white supremacist AI. Cool. He already revoked an executive order that from the Biden administration that was meant to address some minimal level of AI risks, claiming that it actually hinders AI innovation, right? We got AI data centers that have these massive energy needs in the midst of what's now considered widely understood to be a climate emergency, right? We are in an emergency, not the kind he's talking about, but we are in an emergency, and AI is going to be at the heart of some of what this tech emergency looks like. Now, whether it's through facial recognition, whether it's through or other ways that AI is going to be used, and it has been used and will continue to be used in our criminal justice system to enhance racial disparities, and further incarcerate, our people. Or if it's used to create the political echo chamber that the fascists need in order to advance their agenda, right, through disinformation, deep fakes, and also by reunifying statistics and white supremacy, right? This is part of what happens in the criminal justice system. But this unleashed, right, and unregulated AI becomes a key tool to spreading a fascist agenda. Not only does it speed up decision-making through automation, democracy, real socialist democracy or democratic socialism, that requires a slowness, like engagement requires a lot of time. You can't, automation speeds it up, right? It speeds it up. It doesn't allow democracy to function. It sidesteps traditional labor and speeds up decision making. It invisibilizes the process, reducing engagement. All of this paves the way for fascist agendas and movements. And so I'm gonna conclude here. Look, this is an administration that represents a clear and present danger, but it is a danger that's been building for the last 50 years. And I think we got to understand that. This way that Trump sees journalism as an enemy, but he also understands it to be a tool, it puts us in a position where it makes it hard for us to critique, the pre-existing white supremacy in journalism, because it puts us it backs us into a corner of needing to defend journalism, right? It backs us into a corner. So my question would be, how do we engage in a visionary process that is also strategic, that defends journalism, but also advances it in a new form? So there's a set of strategy questions there that need to be answered at a time when you have a president calling for journalists to be shot. You have the potential for McCarthy level censorship. It's hard to then nuance your critique of journalism under those conditions, right? So that's a question that I think needs to be answered. In particular, you have journalists now who are going to be covering issues that are being directly managed by Homeland Security and the military. Immigration as an issue is not going to be handled by civil agencies. It's being handled by the military and by the Department of Homeland Security, which does not operate using the same set of rules as other parts of the government. And this places those journalists in particular at high risk. How will we deal with that? We have hundreds of thousands of our immigrants that are being deported are Black. How will we cover that? How will we protect those journalists? This is a question I don't have an answer to. We already going to be seeing AI and social platforms replacing journalism, right? On the one hand, while giving carte blanche to Fox News, this is a moment. It's a pivot, a moment of pivot. And the question for me is, this is a small sector. This is a sector that, we can tinker at the edges. We can have small experiments. We can do that. But what's the big idea? What's the thing that can be brought to scale? Who are the partners that are required to move the big idea forward? How do you begin to align yourself, not simply ideologically, but practically with more left forces, with movement forces, with forces that have scale already? These are questions that I think need to be answered. You know, we're dealing with a moment when, whether it's a executive order on immigration, or what they call it, the ending radical and wasteful government DEI programs, right? Rolling back every civil rights gain since Reconstruction, undoing a century of anti-discrimination policy, setting the stage for a resurgence of white male authority, whether in federal contracts, as federal workers, in tech companies as private employees, or as students in schools and universities, right? We go back again, and I'll conclude here. We go back to history, right? The very framework of civil rights in America is based on the gaining of rights by formerly enslaved Africans in America, right? Who this understanding, the way the Constitution engages with the native peoples of this land. These two forces shaped our understanding of what civil rights is in America. And so this is important for us as we move forward, as we try to establish what is a, quote, civil and human rights agenda in this era. It needs to be understood inside of history, right? Not out. We can't be ahistoric with it. We need to be moving inside of history. We have I believe we have an accountability to the communities that we claim to serve, to not be armchair ideologues, to not sit around and argue with each other about small differences in ideology. We have a strategy to move. We have to determine what is going to save our people, what is going to advance our agenda and goals, and how best to do it. And we're terrified, we're grieving, we're confused, we're lost, and yet as people who have taken up this mantle, we don't get the luxury of we get to feel, we have to, but we have to turn and face the feeling. We have to face the future. We have to sit inside of this moment with practical practical strategies in our hands. We can't just I'm gonna tell you, there's nothing I hate more than the armchair leftists. All of the you got great ideas but don't do shit. Like, that's uninteresting to me. You know what I'm saying? We have something to win. We have communities to protect. We need to forge a new partnership with the left. We need to reconsider our held beliefs about democracy and its relationship to capital. We need to build a strong and real class analysis that merges with our understanding of white supremacy. And we need to rethink reparations. We have to understand the imperial nature of the system that we're fighting. We can't reform the technological rule. We have to find its levers and dismantle them one by one. That doesn't mean we're anti-reform. That means that we need to find the reforms that are intended to dismantle that particular system. We have to understand the difference between that. Reparations is a tool and a process by which we reclaim resources owed to a people and repurpose those resources in the service of those people and have justice and freedom, not just for those people, but for all people. Not only to recompense what was lost. So the apology is I could give a fuck. Through organizing, we carry out this strategy. I don't care about the recompense of money. I care about the recompense of justice, of freedom, of power. So I want to really close with this idea that in an Afrofuturist vision, we are recompensing power. We're shifting the balance of power. And I see it as your charge to develop a strategy inside of our media and technology arena that is able to do that. That partners with unlikely partners, that deals with people you might not otherwise deal with. It don't matter. will it move the agenda forward? Can we stay focused on our goals and our fight for freedom? Then it's worth doing. I believe in not only everyday people and our power, but I believe in study, and I believe in partnership, and I believe in debate, and I believe in principles, and I believe in justice. That's, to me, with that shared vision, that shared principles, a shared good, strong analysis, I think that's what will help us win.